Hi there everyone, welcome back to my channel, and for all the FFTCG fans out there, we've got a brand new deck to show you this week, and this one is really enjoyable, and it's actually pretty strong as well. It's very thematic towards Final Fantasy VII, but it brings a bit of a twist, and it's something I've been experimenting with for quite a while, which is Chocobos. Now, I've spoken before, when I first reviewed Opus 4 when it came out, the fact that I really loved the fact that Chocobos became a thing. And I've noticed that there are a lot of Chocobo decks going around at the moment, but they're mostly wind-water, because obviously water has a lot of more support for standard units. But then I sort of looked at one of the Chocobos and thought, hold on, this one's a Final Fantasy VII forward. So maybe then there's some synergies there to be had, so I ended up coming up with this deck, and it's actually tested very well. So if you want to see the contents of this deck and the way to play it, then stay tuned and keep on watching. So the list is just here, as you can see, and we're going to start with the forwards. Now, the first forward that we're going to talk about is a card that I've gone on record numerous times as saying that I'm not a big fan of, but it does actually work very well here, and it is very popular in other places, and that's Cloud. Now, Cloud, when it comes in, if you have another Final Fantasy VII forward, then he deals 7,000 damage to something. And the Chocobos in this deck, the focal point of the Chocobos in this deck is the FF7 Chocobo, and you have other forwards in this deck that can trigger that in things like Tifa, and you also have Zack. So that's also, a really cool way that you can start triggering Clouds, and just that swinging momentum when you play a guy and kill a guy, much like Legendary Vivi, who is also in this deck, can really do wonders for your for your momentum gain. So 3 copies of Cloud is sort of what I've gone with here, although another really good alternative to Cloud in any deck that runs Chocobos is Terra. Now, Light Terra is really particularly good because you can go searching for Valofor, which is a board wipe, and given that many of the well, a temporary board wipe. And given that many of the Chocobos have haste or have ways of giving haste, then Terra searching up Valofor can be a really massive push in your favour. But, Valofor is definitely in this deck for much of the same reason, and you have a lot of haste in this deck through things like Tifa, Ranger, and Chocobo. But, having the ability to, just deal damage to things and push them out of the way means that this is more FF7 related, so it's going to appeal to FF7 fans out there, and it's of quite a different dynamic and it's more aggressive. So going into the fire forwards now, we have 4 different copies of Tifa, 3 of the starter deck Tifa, which is a card I've not really been playing for quite some time, but she's still very good. So you're going to get a lot of this deck actually out of a Final Fantasy VII starter deck, so you could probably bear that in mind as well if you're wanting to show somebody some new stuff, although there are quite a lot of legends in this deck, so you could try and make a cheaper version for it. Perhaps I'll do something like that sooner down the line, because Chocobos are cheap. Tifa is mostly there because she's a big haste guy if you have Zangan out, and her S ability is still quite relevant, and then we have a single copy of the common one because, again, haste. And Aggro's been performing very well recently. My last deck was an Aggro deck, and this one is one as well, so for all you guys who like red in Magic, then these are the decks that are going to appeal to you. So carrying on, we have Zack, as I've mentioned earlier. Zack continues the FF7 trend, but also because of the fact that you have a lot of power boosters in this deck for standard units, through things like Arc and Maria, Zack actually buffs them quite nicely as well with his come into play effect. So if you have a bunch of Chocobos down, because the thing that Chocobos are really good at is accumulating a large field very quickly, then you can just kind of play a Zack and start pushing even quicker. And that's a really nice thought. And then when the Zack dies, obviously you can go and get a Cloud, and if you have a Chocobo or a Tifa out, then it's going to trigger Cloud as well. So definitely a good card to be playing in this deck. And then 2 copies of Ranger, mostly for the haste, although being able to kind of do damage to things and being something that's buffed by Arc is also very handy. And then 2 copies of Vivi, because honestly Vivi is just a really good staple in any fire deck, so honestly he could just fit it right in here. Now with the win forwards, as you can see here, the brunt of the win forward allocation is for Chocobos. So you have 3 copies of the Final Fantasy VII Chocobo and 2 copies of the FF13 Chocobo. Now ordinarily I would probably switch these 2 around because the FF13 Chocobo is larger and therefore gets better buffs from things like Arc and Maria. However, because we're going with an FF7 themed Chocobo deck, we're going with 3 copies of the Hasty Chocobo instead. And being able to kind of lift everything up through a Valofor and then replay the Chocobos and start swinging is very useful. And then we have 3 copies of Izana, because Izana is half of the reason we like Chocobos quite so much, because you're able to just play and search for either Fat Chocobo or a different Chocobo if you already have Fat Chocobo, and you just get that momentum down really quickly so that you can start establishing a board and going for your opponent's face. And then I've also put 2 copies of Ranger in because this card has been seeing a lot of play in a lot of decks, particularly wind-water standard units, but I still think it's really relevant in here because if you have Maria and Arc down, it's a 9k guy that can't be targeted. If you get a Zack down as well, is going to be boosted to 11k for that turn. So honestly, I think Ranger's just generally a really good card, but you can definitely switch some of the cards in this deck around, like Furion isn't here. You know, there's other things that we'll get to in the backups, because there's a bit more malleability in the backups than there are in the forwards, but you know, you can definitely cater this to your needs. Going into backups now, we have 2 copies of Zangan, because as I said, Zangan searches up Tifa and gives her haste, which makes her a much bigger threat. And then we also have 2 copies of Red Mage, because Red Mage goes in practically every fire deck, and it does help you push through with things like Ranger if there's things that are too difficult for you to get past. I mean, the power boosts in this deck are very strong, but you know, there are going to be occasions where Red Mage is still useful, and if they're on 6 damage and you have a guy out, you've already won. So definitely 2 copies of Red Mage. It's a 2 CP backup, you can't go wrong with it. 2 copies of Selfie. Now Selfie in this deck is actually very good, because you also have Fat Chocobo in this deck, which can give Chocobos 2000 power as well. So if you're attacking with a Chocobo and you have a Fat Chocobo and you have a Selfie out, you could grant that Chocobo 4000 power just by snapping your fingers. And it's just, you know, you have these abilities just to make your guys really big really quickly and just keep pushing. And if anything gets too much for you, Valor 4, everything comes back to hand and you just start over. And it's a really nice kind of way to go around that, because you will have the advantage in that particular scenario because your guys have haste and theirs may not. And then lastly, we have 2 copies of Scholar. The main reason I want to put Scholar in here is, you know, again, if you've got bigger, like things that are bigger and you want to be able to deal with them, you can deal the extra damage to them. But primarily this card is in here because it's a 2 CP backup that can get rid of itself when needed. And that's why I quite like it. You know, we could have gone with Sage for haste, much like the Fire Ice deck I posted last time, but I wanted to go with something that could get rid of itself so you can cycle through your backups more easily. Now the backups in this deck for Wind are pretty much solid. So you have Maria, which is going to give all your guys a K, Arc, which is going to give your Chocobos and your Rangers a K, and Fat Chocobo, which is going to get your Chocobos out and give them power. Now the bigger mission that I wonder if, you know, people may want to talk about more is Archer. If you wanted to play Archer and you think Minwoo is very popular in your meta currently, I know Water's very popular everywhere. Some places run Minwoo and Cecil, some places don't. So like if you're worried about that, then definitely make room for Archer in this deck, because it's going to be something that, you know, it's going to help you in those situations where backups are a problem for you. Minwoo's not the only one, but it depends entirely on the situation at hand. In the meta that I've been playing in recently, it's more been Lightning than it has been Water, so therefore I don't need to play Archer in here. But if your meta is different, then you know, there's always so much space when it comes to a deck. And one of the things that I've always noticed when it comes to people who either make comments in videos like this or in general playtime is loads of people say, oh, you're not playing that, you should be playing that. But they don't ever tell you what you should be taking out. But I mean, if I were to play a couple of Archer in here, I would drop an Arc and I would maybe drop down one of the Scholars or something like that, make it slightly more wind orientated, something like that. You can easily make room for it, just it completely depends on the meta that you're in. Summons wise, we've gone with sort of just some general sort of removal and sort of buffers. So Belias is in here mainly for the haste, but giving the first strike and the K power is obviously very useful as well. And then Bahamut is usually there for things like Vanille, who's getting very popular at the moment, where if you kill her, then she can't be resurrected by her own ability. And there are other ways, like if you're against ice and you don't particularly like Devouts, there's ways around that through Bahamut. I generally just really like the card. But the shining example of summons in this particular deck is Valor 4. Now Valor 4 is a very slept on card in my opinion. It's an instant speed, you know, get everything back into its owner's hand. But it doesn't go in every deck, and the reason it goes so well in here though is because you've accumulated resources so quickly, because you have so many searches, so many ways to keep playing things. Like Izana is a perfect example of this. If you lift him back to your hand, he's only 2 CP, so just play him again and then he's free. So you haven't had to worry about paying for him, and you've already re-established your board, and your opponent's then going to have to try. Or if you have haste guys in hand, your opponent's on like 5 damage, you just go, okay, lift everything, just discard things and play them both down and I win the game. So you'd be surprised how extraordinarily powerful Valor 4 can be when played correctly. And then lastly, we've got monsters in this deck, and the reason that we've got monsters in this deck is mainly because of Valor 4, because they're not affected by Valor 4 while they're monsters, and these are both monsters that can sort of turn into forwards and attack. So therefore, if you've got all this removal going on, you have a Bomb, which also, Bomb is also a very good choice in combination with things like VV and Fire Ranger, because it deals like spread damage. So if you attack with it, and your opponent decides to block it, you can blow it up in response and just deal damage and start attacking with other things. It's just, Bomb is very, very good at just applying pressure, whereas Kobold Droid Yin is something that is like, you know, all those big things that we talked about earlier that you might be having trouble with. Kobold Droid Yin just sneaks right under them, because you're not going to have problems with smaller forwards in this deck, except perhaps Knight and a mono water deck, but because, you know, those just get very, very big very, very quickly. But those are the things that you might want to consider getting rid of quickly through things like Bahamut, or, you know, just building up your resources so that you can make a Valor 4 play. So that's it for this deck list, and thank you very much for watching. But before I go, I do quickly want to mention the Crystal Tower, which is a new Final Fantasy trading card game podcast that is hosted by Alex Mr. Cool Hancock, who is everybody's favourite X-Death player, Barnes Final Fantasy Corner, and myself. So if you guys want to try having a listen to those kind of things, we get loads of different players in and we just discuss loads of stuff to do with the game, then follow the link in the description box below and then you can definitely check that out. And don't forget to subscribe to this channel as well, and hopefully I will speak to you guys all very, very soon. Thanks again for watching. See ya!